oh my gosh, there really was a baby in there. Hey, welcome to my labor and delivery story. I am so excited to share my experience. I would definitely consider this a positive birth story. When I went to the hospital to be checked, I was 7.5 centimeters dilated. My water broke as soon as they checked me, and I spent 8 minutes pushing. In this video, I'm going to share my experience. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. I hope you subscribe and join me in my journey to motherhood. It's been a couple of months, but I really wanted to get my story out there. I think it's really important for people to share more of their positive stories when it comes to childbirth. Growing up, I think just like a lot of other people, I had a big fear when it came to childbirth, and I honestly didn't know much about it other than the fact that it hurt, it was painful, which all of those things are true, but I never heard of the positive side of it. With my particular experience, this was my first. Throughout my pregnancy, especially at the beginning, I wanted to know nothing about labor. I didn't want to know anything about birth. I stayed away from reading about it. I didn't really want to watch any videos about childbirth. I just focused on my pregnancy during my first trimester and a lot of my second trimester. I was just focused on what was happening during my pregnancy during those weeks. It wasn't until probably my third trimester or the end of my second trimester I did a little bit more research on labor and birth. So Thursday is when our baby was born. That Tuesday of that week, I was barely a centimeter dilated, and I was about 80% effaced. I actually had no progress in the past 3 weeks. Had my induction scheduled for Sunday. They told me that they would basically keep me overnight on Sunday. I couldn't wear any makeup, I couldn't have any jewelry on, and that they were going to have a balloon inserted to help with dilation. When I found out that I had to schedule my induction, I was a little bit disheartened because I had spent the last 4 to 5 weeks preparing myself for a vaginal birth, but I just welcomed the fact that I was going to have an induction, and I was trying to prepare myself mentally for that. I did have spontaneous labor. So Wednesday at 2:30 a.m. I felt my first contractions that I felt my entire pregnancy, and I was so excited. I remember, but they were only about 10 minutes apart. I got up from bed. I could remember I had like half of a peanut butter sandwich with almond milk because I was trying to prepare myself for a long day of labor. I couldn't sleep because I was so excited, so I ended up taking some melatonin that evening. So I went back to bed around 3 or so, maybe 3:30, and I remember my husband had to wake me up when my alarm went off. And my alarm went off around 5:45 a.m. in the morning. He got up to get ready for work, and I stayed in bed for a little bit trying to see if I felt a contraction, and I did. I got up from bed and I told him about it. He was like, well, should I call off work? And I was like, well, my contractions aren't really close, so let's just wait. So I went outside to walk with him, to walk our dog, to see if my contractions would progress, and they actually ended up stopping. I asked work if I could stay home so I could see if I could progress a little bit more. My husband asked me again if he needed to stay home, and I told him that it doesn't seem like my contractions are happening regularly, so I'll keep you in touch. That whole day I ended up staying home. I took another walk, and I spent all day cleaning. I was already nesting for 3 weeks, but on that Wednesday I was all over the place. I was doing laundry, wiping down my kitchen counters, I was mopping, cleaning the bathrooms, and I remember thinking to myself after a long day of cleaning that I would save the vacuuming and taking out the trash for the next day. Little did I know that I was gonna have my baby. I was doing morning and evening walks, but I remember that particular Wednesday I was just so exhausted from all the cleaning I did that I ended up skipping my evening walk. During that Wednesday I felt contractions, like 1 or 2 contractions every hour or so. So they were not close at all, but they were definitely happening. At this point, I was drinking red raspberry leaf tea, and it had been already a few days of doing that. I was eating dates, eating pineapple, and I was bouncing on my ball whenever I was sitting in my living room. I was just hoping my baby would come before my induction. I remember that Wednesday evening, I was on the phone with my mom and my sister telling them that I felt my first ever contractions, and they were like, maybe that melatonin you took stopped your contractions. I thought about it, I was like, maybe, I'm not really sure. But I'll keep you guys posted. We went to bed like right after I had that conversation with them, and around 9 p.m. I felt contractions again. They were painful, like menstrual cramps, but it wasn't any type of cramp that stopped me from talking or anything like that. I still could talk to my husband and get ready for bed. I remember like wincing a little bit, but they didn't last very long. So we both go to bed. I wake up around 12:30, and they're more painful to the point where I have to turn on my hypnobirthing audio and listen to it. For about half an hour, I am breathing through my contractions. They're really close together. They're about 3 to 4 minutes apart, maybe 5 to 4 minutes apart, because at this point I was breathing really loud trying to get through the contractions because they were getting a little bit more painful. So he helped me count my contractions, and we had spent a total about an hour counting the contractions between him and I, and he basically encouraged me to call the doctor, so I did. They asked if I had any bloody show or anything like that, and I didn't at this point. They asked me when I was last checked for dilation, and I told them just Tuesday I was checked and I was barely a centimeter, and my doctor said, okay, well, it sounds like it's early or latent labor, and it's best if you were to stay home for a few hours. Keep an eye out for any bloody show or anything like that, and once you have your bloody show, then you could come in. So I was like, okay. At this point though, my husband had already walked our dog, he packed the car with all of our luggage, and he was already dressed, ready to go, and I had to break the news and tell him that we just need to stay home. I just remember laying in bed, trying to breathe through my contractions. They were definitely more painful than the ones I felt before we went to bed. And I told him, why don't you go to sleep? You know, we're gonna have a long day. I want you to get some rest. He's like, I don't think I could sleep. And I was like, why not? What's wrong? And he said that he was just too awake at this point. And I said, please rest for me. I knew at this point that I had to sort of cope through my contractions a little bit quieter instead of breathing out as loudly as I was. I can remember putting my hypnobirthing back on and breathing through them a lot more quietly. And I remember thinking to myself, it's okay, you can do this, you got this. Every time I had a contraction, that actually lasted me through the rest of the night anyways. I fell asleep in between my contractions. I managed to do so in a way that did not disturb my husband. He was able to sleep until that morning, but I can remember that my contractions were very painful. It felt like I was what I would assume as back labor. It felt like I had to go to the bathroom, even though when I would go to the bathroom, nothing would happen. I remember watching someone else's birth video, and they were talking about how, like, sitting on the toilet, they would feel some sort of relief. I remember doing that, and I felt like that same kind of relief. It was pretty tough, but I was able to somehow labor in my sleep. I was in and out of the bed the whole time, but it wasn't, in my mind, it wasn't what I expected it to be. I didn't expect to be spending most of my labor in bed, but I'm very thankful for it. I had the labor that I had always wanted but never thought that I would have. Then we ended up waking up together at around 5:30, 5:40. We spent another hour or so counting my contractions. During this time, we were getting ready for the hospital. I was able to brush my teeth and get somewhat ready. I remember trying to brush my teeth, and it was a bit hard, but with contractions, you know, you have that time after the contraction to do whatever you need to do, and that was my main focus, trying to get ready in between contractions. It was a little bit harder because with these contractions I couldn't really function with these contractions. I was on the ground on my hands and knees whenever a contraction happened, or I was over the bed trying to cope through the contractions, but once a contraction went away, I was able to stand up and continue to do whatever I was doing. One funny thing that I can remember was thinking in my head that my husband needed to eat something. I went to the kitchen to prepare a bagel for him, splitting the bagel in half, sticking one in the toaster and like going through a contraction, and then like putting the other half of the bagel in the toaster. It's just funny thinking back at it that I was so concerned about this stuff, thinking that I would have like hours and hours of labor left. I was in the midst of my actual labor, but I was still preparing for it. It's funny thinking about it now. So I'm trying to prepare his bagel and I'm going through contractions. I remember fill up my water bottle with ice and water so that I would have water during my labor at the hospital. That was also difficult. I had the freezer door open and I had a contraction, so I had to stop and cope through my contraction and then continue. Once I was done in the kitchen, I was in the living room. I was with my husband counting my contractions. I was on my stability ball or birth ball coping with my contractions. Every time I had a contraction, I had to lean over something, or I was on my hands and knees, and then I would get up and walk about and do whatever I needed to do. At some point, my husband asked me to call my doctor again because my contractions are very regular and they're a lot more painful. So when I called my doctor, I actually got a nurse, and the nurse told me that they would have a doctor call me back, and I was like, oh, okay. So we spend a few more minutes at home, and my husband's like, look, I think we need to go. This whole time my husband is thinking that we need to go, and I'm just like, no, I think I can manage them still. I want to make sure that I get the green light from my doctor. I'm thinking that I don't want to show up to the hospital and barely be dilated and be sent back home. So I want to do as much as I possibly can at home with my labor. Somehow we are walking out the door. I think I'm at this point unable to fight him on this. My labor is getting too intense and we are out the door. I remember thinking that I can't sit in the front seat. I needed to sit in the back seat so that I had more room because the contractions were so painful. And I wanted to be able to lean forward on the front seat while I was on the back seat, just like I was at home. And apparently just went down the road, and I told him that he needed to slow down because I'm like this on the back seat, and I'm going through my contractions and it feels like he's going so fast and the car ride is just so bumpy, and I tell him like, slow down please, and he's like, I'm already going really slow. Later I find out that he was only in the neighborhood at that point. I think that's just really funny. Most of the car ride I spend with my eyes closed. Luckily we're only like 10, maybe 12 minutes from the hospital. Somehow without knowing, I think about my hypnobirthing audio, and I remember the lady in the hypnobirthing audio saying how you should take a moment to take in your surroundings and look around. So I think about this in between my contractions. As soon as a contraction stops, I look out my window and I see a really beautiful and gorgeous sunset. It's radiant bright orange and it's just so beautiful, and I remember looking the other way and looking up at my husband driving and really admiring him and thinking about how much I love him. And then as soon as I do that, I can feel another contraction and my head goes back down and my eyes are closed, and I'm coping through another contraction. Before I know it, we are at the hospital and my husband opens a door to help me out of the car. Of course, I'm going through my contractions and it's a lot harder to just go and do things. I have to manage to get out of the car in between my contractions and walking out. And he's holding on to me as we walk into the hospital. Once we make it to the front desk, the person there asked for my ID and my husband has my wallet. Of course, I'm going through my contractions, so it's very difficult for me to turn around, look for my ID. So he's trying to find it and he can't find it, and the lady looks at me and she's like, okay, so what's your social? And as soon as I'm about to tell her, I could feel a contraction coming in. She's like, it's okay, just breathe. So I'm like on the counter with my head down trying to bear through another contraction. While I'm laboring, I see from the corner of my eye someone bringing in a wheelchair. My husband finally finds my ID, and they're also putting a wristband on me. They sit me down in the wheelchair and they wheel me to a room where it's just kind of a smaller room. It's got a bed in there and a bathroom, and they tell me to change into a gown. I remember that I had a chapstick in my dress pocket. I'm glad that I had that, but that was the only thing that I had brought into the hospital other than my wallet. The luggage was still in the car, and we decided to leave it in there. I didn't think about taking my luggage in until after. My birth plan was in the luggage, of course. I figured that we would have time to go back and get my luggage. I'm in the bed, I'm in my gown. The whole time I'm laboring, I do my best to smile in between my contractions, to smile at my husband, to let him know that everything is okay and that I'm okay. I know that sounds really silly, but I wanted to create a very peaceful place. I wanted to remain relaxed, and I felt like I did a pretty good job of that. I do remember getting a little bit irritated when I saw that my husband was on his phone, but he was just trying to let his mom know that I was in labor and letting my family know that I was in labor, but I really needed him to just focus on me, so I told him that. Sorry, I had to take a quick break because the little one was crying. So anyways, where was I? One of the nurses finally comes into the room after some time of being there and after some time of laboring. She is asking me some general questions. One of her questions is to rate my pain from a scale of 1 to 10, I think. I told her that my pain was at an 8. I do my best to answer her questions while I'm laboring, but at this point, it's really difficult for me to speak while a contraction is happening, and they're happening pretty close together, so I'm unable to answer her questions thoroughly. So my husband helped me with some of the questions. After the nurse was done, she left and told me that the doctor would be in shortly. And of course, that's never really the case. I spend quite a while laboring, and it gets to the point where I'm a lot more vocal with my contractions. I feel like I am at this point moaning and groaning out loud. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking that I'm almost too loud, and I feel like the people outside can hear me, but it was just a way of coping, I guess, with the labor, and I'm having to squeeze my husband's arm at this point to help me with the pain. Eventually, my mother-in-law arrives. She asks my husband if he's eaten anything yet, and he did not eat the bagel that I was trying to prepare for him. She offers to get him something, but he says that maybe he'll eat later, and in my head I'm thinking, no, he needs to eat something, but I'm having a contraction, so it's difficult for me to say. Eventually, I managed to get out that I think that he needs to eat something, so my mother-in-law says, go ahead and get something while I'm here. But I was hoping that she would be the one to get something for him so that he could stay with me. I am unable to say that because I'm going through a contraction, so he ends up leaving and going to the cafeteria. And in between the time that he's gone, that's when everything escalated and everything started to happen. The doctor eventually comes. I can't even remember like how much time is going by. During this entire time, it's difficult for me to manage speaking and looking around and observing what's going on around me. I am just trying to cope with my labor pains. I just remember at one point I had cursed out loud saying the F word in front of my mother-in-law, and I don't think I've ever cursed like that in front of her, and it almost like shocked her and I. Like, I said it so loud, it was just so funny. The next time I had the urge to curse, I said fudge. Anyways, so the nurse comes in with the doctor, and I can't remember because there was another lady that came with a computer and was trying to ask me questions. I could not answer barely any of her questions. And I guess that's what they had to do with registering patients. I was confused because the nurse was asking me questions beforehand. It was so difficult for me to answer her question. She would ask me a question, and then I would be going through a contraction, so I couldn't answer her. She was like, okay, I'll wait. I was like, oh my God. I guess at some point she gave up, and I guess she asked my mother-in-law to walk out of the room. So I was by myself So I was by myself, and that was the absolute worst. The pain was starting to get really bad. My husband is gone, so the doctor finally comes in with the nurse that came in earlier to ask me those questions. I greet them both with a smile. He even said something about me smiling still, which was funny, but he's here to check me. The nurse is telling him a little bit about what she knows already, and she tells him that my labor pain is at an 8, and then I tell her no, it's more like a 10 now, and they kind of like laugh about it. He checks me and I'm at 7.5 centimeters, and he said, yeah, she's really down there. And I'm thinking, yeah, she really is. As soon as he's done checking me, my water breaks. I'm like, I think my water broke. They check, and sure enough it is. While I'm laboring, I think the doctor leaves, and then the nurse asks me if I want any pain management, if I want to do an IV of pain medication or epidural. My contractions have gotten just so much worse, and I just keep saying, I don't know. I look over to my mother-in-law and I look at her and I'm like, what do I do? Or I look at her and I say, what do you think? And she says, it's up to you, sweetheart. I look at her and I was like, I want the pain to stop. There was another woman there that needed more information from me, but she didn't look like she was a nurse. But she had like a laptop with her, and she was trying to ask me questions. I just couldn't answer them because my contractions felt like they were on top of each other and they were so painful. But I think they were supposed to be basic questions to register me. My mother-in-law is like can't really help me answer them as well as my husband could. This same lady like needed to take a picture of me, so she like has like this webcam camera, and says that she needs to take a photo, and I told her hold on because I felt a contraction coming. As soon as my contraction stops, I smile like this. And later I found out that she used that photo for my little, it's kind of like a profile for the hospital that you can log into, and they have all your information there. That picture is my profile picture. I'm literally like laboring in that bed, and I'm smiling, managing to smile anyways. It was just so funny. Eventually that lady gives up with asking me, and she calls my mother-in-law out of the room, and I'm by myself laboring, and I keep saying out loud, I feel like she's gonna come out. I feel like she's gonna come out, because the baby felt so low, and my contractions stopped feeling like regular contractions. Like they felt like she was ready to come out. Thinking back at it now, I'm pretty sure I had transitioned at that point. The nurse asked me while I was by myself if I wanted any pain medication, and I said yes, please, yes. And she said, okay, I'm gonna give you fentanyl. I think that's what she said. I'm gonna give you fentanyl. It's gonna make you feel a little groggy and drunk, but it's gonna kick in within a minute, and it's gonna last about an hour. And I was like, okay. So as soon as she gives it to me, I feel just like she said I would. When my contraction came, it felt exactly the same. Exactly the same. Like none of the pain went away. All I felt was that I was groggy and drunk and laboring. So I just felt like I was going through my contraction groggy and drunk. So I'm just like, are you serious? I just couldn't believe it. The contractions were getting so bad that I remember I felt almost like I finally felt a little bit more scared, because the contractions hurt so bad, and they were not like the regular contractions. They were the type of contractions that felt like the baby was about to come out. I got scared because I was by myself. My husband wasn't there, and my mother-in-law wasn't there. So I remember like yelling out of the room, and I saw my mother-in-law, and I was like, can you please call him? Can you please call? So I was like asking for my husband, and then I think he was like maybe 5-10 minutes away, and he came, and he was beside me, and she was beside me, and I just remember grabbing onto him, because when it was just my mother-in-law, I was grabbing onto her too, but she felt like so soft in comparison to him, and I didn't want to hurt her, so I was holding back some of my grip, I guess. And when he came back and I grabbed onto him, apparently so tight that he was like, whoa. He He was like, wow, that grip got a lot harder. But it was true because my contractions were just so bad. So they were ready to move me and they rolled me down to my labor and delivery room. I think it was upstairs. The whole time my eyes are like barely open. We finally get into the labor and delivery room and they're counting, they're waiting for my contraction to stop so that they can move me from that one bed into the bigger labor and delivery bed. They lay me down. Once they set me up in the bed, and I think they put my like IV in, I'm not really sure. The nurse said, do you want me to check you? And I say, yes. You're ready to push, she says. When she said that, it didn't even register in my mind because I thought to myself, like, I can't possibly be ready to push because we just got to the labor and delivery room. How am I ready? There's no doctors around. It's just these two nurses. Like, I can't be ready. And she's like, okay, I'm gonna teach you how to push. And I'm like, you want me to push right now? She's like, yes. I tense up. I don't feel like I'm prepared to push because I just feel like there's no doctors around. I just felt like I wasn't prepared at the moment to push because I didn't feel like it was safe yet. I guess I just didn't expect it to be happening so fast, maybe. So she's teaching me how to push. She tells me that I need to like grab my knees. In my head, I'm like, how can I possibly grab my knees? Like, I'm in so much pain right now. What is she talking about? Somehow I managed to do what she asked. She wants me to do like 3 consecutive pushes, and she says she's gonna count to 10. The first 3 pushes, I know I wasn't even trying to push because I was just too scared to push because I just felt like I wasn't ready. And then I guess finally the doctors come in or the doctor comes in with, I don't even remember how much help he had, but all of a sudden everybody comes in, and that's what I was expecting. So that's why I was scared to push when it was just the 1 or 2 nurses. And then yeah, apparently I pushed for 8 minutes. When she came out, I just remember I was in complete and total disbelief. When I looked into her, I just felt like, oh my gosh, there really was a baby in there. Like, I can't believe this is happening. Like, after all that pain and all that time, like, she came out. So I think I was just disbelief, like, wow, I actually did it. I actually pushed a baby out. That's my story. I feel like I may have left out a few details, but if I remember them, I'll share. Yeah, if you ask me, pushing was not as painful as the contractions beforehand. Honestly, labor up until you give birth feels way more painful than pushing, so just want to let you know. I was in the labor and delivery room for like maybe 5 minutes. I had imagined this entire time that I would be laboring for hours and hours in there, so it just didn't go the way I expected it to go, but I'm very thankful for the way it did go. Yeah, there was a couple scary times, but it was actually just a really good labor and delivery. It was still difficult and it was still hard, but I'm super thankful for how it went, and I think a lot of it had to do with what I did to prepare for it. I do want to share how I prepared for it in a separate video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching.